August 15th, 1945. The sun hangs low over the Ōmori prisoner of war camp on a reclaimed island in Tokyo Bay. Salt wind moves across the corrugated roofs, carrying the faint smell of the sea and the sharper stink of unburied latrines. At 16:47 hours, a single B-29 circles once, then releases not bombs, but wooden crates that drift down beneath red and white parachutes. They land with soft thuds in the dust of the compound yard. American prisoners, skeletal shadows in ragged denim, watch in silence as Japanese dards cut the cords. Inside the first crate, canned Spam, powdered eggs, chocolate bars, cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes. Enough for 3 full meals a day for every man, starting immediately. This moment, frozen in the memory of hundreds of survivors, was not merely the end of starvation. It was the instant Imperial Japan looked into the face of American material abundance and understood, with a clarity sharper than any battlefield defeat, that the war was already lost. For 3 years, the prisoners of the Bataan Death March, of Camp O'Donnell, of Cabanatuan, and Ōmori had been reduced to a diet measured in spoonfuls. A daily handful of wormy rice, a watery soup of fish heads, occasional weeds scraped from the compound fence. Official Japanese ration tables for Caucasian prisoners in 1944 allotted 360 grams of rice per man per day, less than half the amount issued to their own frontline soldiers, and even that figure existed mostly on paper. Red Cross parcels, when they arrived at all, were routinely confiscated or slashed open so that tinned milk and corned beef could be sold on the Tokyo black market by the guards themselves. By the summer of 1945, the average American POW in the Tokyo area weighed 92 pounds. Dysentery, beriberi, and pellagra had turned strong men into living skeletons whose skin hung in gray folds. The guards knew the numbers. They had watched the same men die at the rate of 6 or 7 a week. They had written the names in their ledgers with the same indifferent strokes they used for broken shovels or spent shell casings. They had been told, and many believed, that Americans were soft, that their society was decadent, that their soldiers would collapse without the comforts of home. The propaganda films shown in camp cinemas depicted a United States of breadlines and gangsters, a nation too weak to fight a prolonged war. Then came the crates. At Ōmori, Lieutenant Toshino, the camp supply officer, opened the manifest with trembling fingers. The sheet listed 18,000 pounds of food for 420 prisoners, 42 pounds per man for the first week alone. More was promised every 7 days until repatriation. Toshino later wrote in his private diary, discovered decades afterward, "When I saw the quantity, I felt my knees grow weak. I understood for the first time that we had not merely lost battles. We had lost the idea of what a nation could do for its own people." The first hot meal was served at dusk on August 16. Prisoners lined up with mess kits that had not seen real food in months. Each man received a full tin of Spam sliced thick, 2 reconstituted powdered eggs, 4 slices of white bread with real butter, a mound of mashed potatoes made from honest Idaho flakes, and a canteen cup of coffee thick with sugar. The smell alone, butter melting, coffee steaming, meat frying on improvised grills, drifted across the barbed wire into the guard barracks. Guards who minutes earlier had been barking orders now stood motionless. Some removed their caps. A few, survivors remembered, wiped their eyes with the sleeves of their faded uniforms. Sergeant Major Shigeru Yokota of the Kimpotai detachment was seen sitting on an ammunition box, head bowed, repeating the same phrase under his breath, "We cannot win against this." Another guard, Corporal Hiroshi Tanaka, asked through the interpreter whether the food had come from army stores or civilian charity. When told it was simply standard U.S. Army field rations multiplied 1,000 times over by a country that had not known hunger in 4 years, Tanaka began to cry openly. He had guarded these same prisoners for 18 months, had beaten them for stealing a single rice ball, and now watched them eat better in captivity than his own family had eaten in Tokyo since 1943. The symbolic object that threaded through every recollection was not a weapon, but a simple can, the olive-drab tin of Spam, its blue and yellow label already legendary across the Pacific. To the prisoners, it was life itself, dense protein that could be eaten cold or hot, traded or hoarded, fried or sliced thin to last longer. To the guards, it became the perfect emblem of American plenty, mass-produced by the millions in Hormel plants that had never paused, shipped across an ocean no Japanese submarine could close, delivered by parachute because the victors could afford to be gentle. One guard was overheard saying, "They drop food from the sky the way we once dropped bombs." The can appeared again and again in post-war interviews, held up by former prisoners like a talisman, described by former guards with the same hushed tone reservists once used for the emperor's portrait. Within 48 hours, the psychological transformation was complete. Prisoners who days earlier had been too weak to stand now walked the compound yard with a new steadiness. Guards who had strutted with bamboo sticks and leather whips now averted their eyes. The power relationship inside the wire inverted without a shot fired. American medical officers took over the camp hospital. Japanese doctors stood aside and watched penicillin, that other miracle of abundance, cure infections in days that had festered for months. The daily roll call, once an occasion for beatings, became a formality no one bothered to enforce with violence. Men who had prayed only to survive now began to speak of going home, of steaks and milkshakes, of mothers and sweethearts who had never stopped believing the food would come. For Japan, the lesson cut deeper. In the final weeks before surrender, as B-29s flew unopposed over the home islands, dropping not only bombs but leaflets promising more food, more medicine, more mercy, the realization spread from camp guards to admirals to the imperial staff itself. The nation that had marched forth to secure rice and oil had been defeated not merely by bombs, but by breakfast. The divine wind met the assembly line, and the assembly line had won. Years later, when historians asked former guards why they wept that afternoon, the answers were strikingly similar. It was not pity, though pity was there. It was not shame alone, though shame burned hot. It was the sudden, blinding understanding that everything they had been taught about strength and weakness, about spirit triumphing over matter, had been refuted by a can of processed pork and a nation that could feed its prisoners better than Japan could feed its soldiers, its civilians, its emperor. In the end, the war in the Pacific was decided long before the atomic bombs fell, in kitchens, in factories far from any battlefield, in the quiet certainty that one side could produce oceans of food and the other could not. The tears of the guards at Ōmori were the moment that truth became visible, undeniable, human. And so, beneath a late summer sky turning the color of liberty, emaciated men sat in the dust and ate like kings while their captors stood weeping at the edge of history, holding empty rifles and the shattered fragments of a dream. The Spam can, small and commonplace, had become the quiet trumpet that announced the fall of an empire. In its dull metal surface was reflected not just the end of a war, but the enduring proof that freedom, rightly understood, is measured not in miles of conquered soil, but in the distance a nation is willing to go to feed even its enemies, and in the abundance that flows unstoppably from open hands rather than clenched fists.